We show you the easy way how to remove broken exhaust manifold bolts out of a cylinder head, aluminum or cast iron. I'm Tim Johnson. You're watching Shop Tool Reviews. A few months ago, I did a short Instagram post on removing a broken bolt out of a cylinder head, exactly like one of these. In fact, it was this one right here. And people lost their mind on how I did it. So anyway, good or bad, and there were some good comments, but mostly bad comments. So I figured I would do it the right way and maybe show the world that I do know how. No, really just show you an easy way to remove broken manifold bolts. Now, a lot of different manufacturers have this same issue, but definitely these LS engines, usually the first and the last exhaust manifold is always broke on these things, if not both of them. And then even some in the middle as well. So very common issue, but also a lot of the Fords, a lot of your diesels as well. So this will work on an aluminum cylinder head. It will also work on a steel or cast iron cylinder head as well. A few different precautions you have to take, but let's go through it. We've got two broken on this one. We've got the top one and the bottom one, or the first and the last. So let's remove both of them and see how it goes. Okay, as I mentioned the last time I did this, people kind of lost their minds on how I did it. So the quick and easy way I could do and have it out in 5 minutes, but then again, people would lose their mind again. So we're going to do this, quote, the right way. You can see we've got a broken bolt here. We've got a broken bolt here. Now these things are not proud. In other words, they're not above the surface. They're actually broken down beneath the surface, and it looks like they've got probably at least some rust, if not some grease and rust on there. So they're broken below the surface. The first and the last here, we need to get those out. How do we do it? Well, today we're going to do it. We're not going to use a drill and tap. Obviously, you probably know how to do that, or a drill and easy out, where you could obviously drill the center. But then the problem is these things are usually broken uneven, so you've got to find center. You've got to clean it up, make sure your drill bit doesn't wander off, and then next thing you do, you get into aluminum, you're using a Healy coil, on and on. So that's kind of a pain if that doesn't go perfectly as planned. So first thing, let's cover up the at least the finished surface here so that we don't hurt anything while we're doing the work. And probably the right thing to use here would be like some aluminum metal tape or aluminum tape, like sheet metal ductwork tape. But I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to cover this with a little duct tape to keep any debris off our valves, although this head is disassembled, so there are no valves in here, but we'll keep it out of the ports, so we're not worried about messing up any of the ports, and we'll go ahead and tape up the rest of the mating surface here. And obviously you can get as safe as you want to here. And I'm going to go ahead, we'll fill in all the spark plug holes as well. Okay, so we've got the majority of our surfaces somewhat protected. Listen, if you wanted to lay, we're going to be welding, so if you wanted to lay a welding blanket on here, you're more than welcome to do so. You can get as safe as you want to as far as protecting the surface, protecting your valves, protecting the ports, the valve guides, all that. You can get as crazy as you want to. We're going to rebuild this head, so I'm not that particularly worried about it. So now let's go in and clean up these surfaces here on these bolts. I'm going to take a little die grinder with a little burr bit on the end of it and just be careful cleaning it up. And you don't want to do that, what I just did, and I got a little bit of aluminum, but basically I'm just wanting to knock that rust off, get to some shiny metal so that we got something to weld to. Same thing over here. Okay, so that cleaned up quick. Looks like we've got some fresh metal that we can actually to weld to. And now what we want to do is we need a couple of sacrificial nuts. So we need a couple of sacrificial nuts, and if you want to get, again, as protective as you want to be, you could use a couple of washers as well to kind of be an intermediate surface between the head and the nut. That's, again, depending on how safe you want to be. I don't think we're going to use, we may use one washer and one without a washer, just to kind of show this process. Okay, now before, make sure that I get my ground clamp on a good spot here. I've got a bolt stuck right there in the head. Should be a good enough ground. Now before I put the nut on there and weld that on there, I just want to put a little tack on that broken stud or that broken bolt so it's a little proud or a little above that surface. And the good thing is your weld won't stick to the aluminum, but you want to make sure you try to keep as much heat as possible off of the aluminum. Hit it one more time. So now we're sticking up above the aluminum there. That's perfect. So I'm going to take my bolt, my nut. We'll set it right there. Okay, we're just going to fill that nut. Once we get that weld started, we want to fill that nut with weld, but we want to make sure you're not leaving any voids when you're doing that. And by the way, it's not uncommon that you have to sacrifice a couple of different nuts here, because let's face it, the only thing holding that nut to that existing bolt is the weld. So if it didn't get a good weld right there on that surface of the bolt, it's not going to hold that well. So it's not uncommon for these things to break off when we go to take that off. And again, we could have used a sacrificial washer under that to kind of save that a little better than we did. So that's just another precautionary measure you can take. Let's go over to the other side and we'll do that. Okay, same thing here. The first thing I want to do is get that broken bolt to where it's not below the surface of that aluminum or below the head. So now we're sticking up above it. Now I could clean off that soot if I wanted to, but again, I'm not going to worry about that. That'll just provide us kind of a layer of protection, if you will. I don't need that aluminum clean by any means. I can do that afterwards. So this time we're going to use a washer here. Use a nut as well. We'll make sure that it's centered right over our weld. And you don't want to try to run that all at once. Make sure that you're getting a good penetration on the weld down there. Okay, let's let that cool for a few minutes and then we'll hit it with a wrench or a socket and get those out. Okay, so it's had a few minutes to cool down. Now the best thing probably to use would be a ratchet and a socket to back that out. You're not going to scar anything. Your rounded edge here of the socket shouldn't hurt anything. So backing that out with the ratchet and socket is probably the best bet. I want you to be able to see it, so I'm going to use closed end of a combination wrench and just see here if this thing comes out. And I'm just going to rock it back and forth. I don't want to force it. A little bit of force on this, but not a bunch. Again, it broke for a reason, so you're not wanting to force much. You're just going to break that nut off of there. I think we got this one. So there's one. Let's see if we get the other one on the first try. Okay, here's the second one. A little bit tougher. You can just kind of easily work it back and forth until you know it's turning easy, and then you're not going to break it again, hopefully. That's 2 for 2. As I mentioned, sometimes you may use 2 or 3 nuts getting these things out, depending on how bad they're rusted in there. So now let's clean it up and see how well it looks. I don't see any scars at all on there. Little grease from my wire brush, but no scars from the welding, no scars from the wrench at all. Let's check the other side. So this one did not have the washer. So a little mark there from where I got it with the burr bit. So I could have been a little more careful there, but other than that, no welding splatter, no issues from the wrench or anything like that, or even from the nut being welded on there. Nice and clean. So that worked out excellent. There they are. So easy way to remove broken exhaust manifold bolts. And you can see right there, there really was not a lot attaching that other than that weld that we kind of brought up from the surface. So you could carefully kind of bring that up a little higher on the surface. And by the way, if you were welding on a cast iron head, again, a piece of aluminum tape or something across there would act as a kind of a sacrificial barrier from you welding onto the cast iron. Typically, it's going to stick to the nuts you're welding and the bolt better than the cast iron. It doesn't like to stick to cast iron well unless you've got it preheated. So keep the heads cool if they're cast iron, and again, you'll have a better opportunity. But the aluminum is very easy because the weld's not going to stick to the aluminum. Well, if that's not the easiest way to remove some broken manifold bolts, then I'm not sure what is. Yeah, if it's in the car or in the truck, it's a little bit tougher, but it can still be done. I've done it many times, and it's just a great way to remove these, especially on aluminum heads. Even cast iron heads, you can do it. A little bit more of a hassle. Again, weld can stick to cast iron, but it's not going to stick as well as on some fresh steel. So make sure that cast iron is nice and cold and not warm. And also make sure you're getting on the bolt the best you can. And make sure you clean up that bolt first, like on the edge, so that you get some penetration, because you may not get a lot of weld sticking to that. And as I mentioned, I've gone through several nuts before, and you're going to sacrifice those. They're going to be done, obviously, and they'll just break off the top of the bolt, especially if those are stuck in there well. These weren't stuck too bad. One of them came out rather easily. The other one I had to work back and forth and put a little more pressure on. But again, very doable. And I'm telling you, I don't know of a time that I failed on being able to do this, especially on these LS heads. Very typical, but it works every single time so far. Hey, check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can even find us on TikTok. And if you wouldn't mind, if you haven't done so already, would you hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't done so already? And by all means, if you hated our video, then give us a thumbs down. But would you let us know in the comments why? Have a great day and keep smiling.